We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel. The West Texas sky stretched endlessly above the oil fields, a vast expanse of black pierced only by the thin glow of derrick floodlights and the faraway shimmer of stars. It was March 17, 1978, and the night shift of the Grayson Oil Company rig outside Odessa was running as routinely as any other, or at least that's what it seemed. Diesel engines hummed, pneumatic drills pounded into ancient rock layers, and the sour smell of crude and grease hung thick in the dry desert air. Yet by dawn, one man would be gone, swallowed by the very industry that sustained this town, leaving behind only a trail of eerie static from his CB radio and questions that would haunt West Texas for decades. The man was Harold Whitaker, 34 years old, a driller known for his quiet competence and his near-obsessive devotion to his job. Colleagues often joked that Harold seemed married to the oil rigs, divorced once already, childless, and with little social life beyond poker nights and long, solitary drives down Highway 20. He wasn't charismatic like his shift partner, Bobby Tex Ramirez, nor reckless like some of the younger roughnecks who drank their paychecks away in smoky bars downtown. But Harold had a reputation, steady, reliable, a man who kept his head when machinery malfunctioned or tempers flared. That night, Harold clocked in at 11:52 p.m., carrying his dented thermos of black coffee and a well-worn notebook where he logged equipment stats. He was dressed as he always was, oil-stained work boots, flannel shirt under heavy coveralls, and a hard hat that had seen better days. The crew on duty was small: Ramirez, Harold, two younger men still learning the ropes, and shift supervisor Clyde Jennings, who had been with Grayson Oil for nearly 20 years. By midnight, the drill had struck a stubborn patch of shale, slowing progress. Harold volunteered to climb down and make manual adjustments, his flashlight beam bobbing across the skeletal rigging as he disappeared into the guts of the machinery. Ramirez stayed at the controls, tuning the rig's CB radio to the company channel, but all he could hear was a rising wall of static, an unnatural hiss that drowned out normal chatter from nearby rigs. He frowned, adjusting the knobs. Nothing but noise. At 12:37 a.m., Ramirez called down to Harold, his voice sharp with irritation. "Harry, you done yet? She ain't responding right." No answer. Only the distorted crackle of static, like wind rushing through wires. Ramirez tried again, louder this time. Still silence. The younger crew members exchanged nervous glances, but Clyde, the supervisor, shrugged it off. "Probably too deep in the pit to hear ya. Man knows what he's doing." But by 1:05 a.m., something was clearly wrong. Harold had not returned, and the drilling assembly was rattling strangely, as if misaligned. When Ramirez descended with a flashlight, he expected to find Harold tightening bolts or muttering about stubborn machinery. Instead, the maintenance platform was empty. Tools lay scattered, one wrench balanced on a ledge as if set down in haste. Harold's hard hat rested upright beside the gearbox, its lamp still glowing. The men searched frantically, first within the immediate rig, then across the perimeter lit by their truck headlights. They shouted Harold's name into the dry night air. No answer. The desert was silent, broken only by the metallic groan of equipment and the ceaseless hum of generators. Then came the discovery that chilled even the hardened oilmen. On the CB radio, Ramirez picked up faint interference that wasn't just static. Through the hiss came fragments of a voice, Harold's voice, muttering words they couldn't quite understand. One of the younger men swore he heard Harold say, "Behind me," before the transmission dissolved into a long, unbroken wail of static. Clyde, shaken but unwilling to lose control of his crew, ordered them to keep working until dawn, insisting Harold must have wandered off or collapsed somewhere on the grounds. But inside, each man knew something was wrong. Harold Whitaker wasn't the type to abandon his post. And if he had fallen or injured himself, they should have found him within minutes. Yet the rig held no trace, no footprints leading away, no dropped flashlight, no blood. Nothing. At sunrise, the rig shut down, and the sheriff's department was called. Deputies arrived expecting a workplace accident, maybe a fall into a shaft or a slip in the machinery. But thorough inspection revealed no body, no evidence of injury, no sign Harold had ever left the rig at all. His thermos of coffee still sat on the workbench, half full and warm to the touch. His logbook lay open to an unfinished entry, pen resting across the page as though paused mid-sentence. For the first time in decades, the oil field crew, men who prided themselves on toughness and rational explanations, found themselves whispering about curses, about shadows in the desert, about the way static seemed to echo long after Harold's radio was turned off. The disappearance of Harold Whitaker would soon become one of Texas's most baffling cold cases, a story that grew darker with every passing year. By mid-morning on March 17, 1978, the barren oil fields outside Odessa had been transformed into an impromptu search site. Sheriff Wayne Daley, a stout, broad-shouldered lawman whose leathery skin testified to decades beneath the West Texas sun, arrived with 3 deputies, a pair of bloodhounds, and a palpable air of skepticism. Men didn't just vanish, he told himself, not in the middle of a work site filled with lights, machinery, and half a dozen witnesses. If Harold Whitaker was missing, there was a logical explanation: an accident, a misstep, a failure of vigilance. But within hours, Daley's seasoned confidence had begun to erode. The bloodhounds balked immediately. Their handlers guided them to Harold's discarded hard hat and notebook, encouraging the dogs to pick up a scent. The hounds sniffed eagerly, whined, and then pulled toward the rig platform. They circled once, twice, pacing along the steel beams with ears pricked, then froze. Both animals began whining, refusing to move forward, as if whatever trail they sought ended abruptly. Deputies tried again with Harold's gloves, his jacket left hanging in the brake shack, even the half-drunk thermos of coffee. Each time, the hounds tracked a short distance toward the rig, then stopped cold, bewildered. It was as though Harold's scent simply ended, erased from the air itself. Sheriff Daley frowned. He had seen search dogs fail before, scent trails lost to weather or trampled by too many boots, but never with such eerie finality. "Damn dogs spooked," he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. The crew's statements only deepened the mystery. Ramirez, jittery and pale from lack of sleep, recounted the strange static transmissions he'd heard on the CB radio. "It was his voice, Sheriff," Ramirez insisted. "I swear to God, it was Harry. He said something about behind me, like someone was there with him. And then just gone. Static like the devil his sin at me." Daley dismissed the radio story as stress-induced hallucination, but the younger roughnecks confirmed they had heard the same noises. "Wasn't no hallucination, Sheriff," one of them swore, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "That was Whitaker. Sounded like he was whisperin' from the other side of the static." By noon, deputies expanded the search beyond the rig. They scoured the surrounding desert scrubland, a flat, unforgiving expanse dotted with mesquite and tumbleweed. Tracks were difficult to distinguish in the sandy soil, but investigators expected at least some sign of Harold if he had wandered off: boot prints, discarded clothing, even evidence of wildlife. Yet there was nothing. The desert lay untouched, silent but for the buzz of cicadas and the distant thrum of generators. The Grayson Oil Company executives arrived in the afternoon, their polished sedans kicking up dust along the dirt access road. Company man Arthur Kincaid, a wiry figure with a sharp mustache and sharper temper, wasted no time cornering Sheriff Daley. "This is a liability nightmare," he barked, waving his cigarette for emphasis. "We need to treat this as a workplace incident, not a circus sideshow. Contain your deputies, Sheriff. And for Christ's sake, keep the press out of this." Daley bristled. He had little patience for corporate meddling, especially from men who cared more about insurance payouts than missing workers. "Mr. Kincaid, with all due respect," the sheriff growled, "I've got a man gone without a trace in the middle of your rig. That makes this my business, not yours. I'll run this investigation how I see fit." Despite Daley's resistance, Grayson's influence was already casting long shadows. The local press had caught wind of the disappearance, but company representatives leaned hard on editors, downplaying the story as a routine search for a worker possibly injured on site. Only a short column ran in the Odessa American the next morning, buried between weather reports and high school basketball scores. To the outside world, Harold Whitaker's absence barely registered. Inside Odessa, however, rumors spread like wildfire. By Friday evening, taverns along 8th Street buzzed with speculation. Some claimed Harold had fallen into one of the deep shafts, his body unrecoverable beneath thousands of feet of rock. Others whispered darker theories, that Harold had been murdered by his crew, perhaps over debts or disputes, and his body disposed of in the unforgiving desert. Still others leaned into superstition, muttering about ghost stories tied to the oil fields, tales of men hearing voices in the static, of shadows moving where no shadows should be, of something old and angry lurking beneath the Texas shale. Sheriff Daley focused on hard evidence, but even he could not ignore the unsettling details that emerged in the days following. The logbook entry found on Harold's workbench ended mid-sentence, pressure holding steady, but noise from, and then nothing. The pen had trailed a jagged line across the page, as though snatched from his hand. The machinery itself showed no signs of malfunction severe enough to justify Harold's prolonged absence. The adjustments he'd been making were minor, routine. Witness accounts revealed small inconsistencies. Ramirez swore Harold had descended the platform at 12:10 a.m., but Clyde Jennings, the supervisor, insisted it was closer to 12:25. The younger crew members offered yet another time. These discrepancies might have been fatigue and stress, but Daley noted them carefully. 3 days after the disappearance, deputies conducted a full shaft inspection. They lowered cameras and equipment into the borehole, certain they'd find remains or at least evidence of a fall. The footage revealed nothing, just endless layers of rock, blackness stretching deep into the earth. The shaft was clean, dry, and empty. Linda Whitaker, Harold's sister and only surviving family member, arrived from Dallas on March 20th. A schoolteacher by trade, she was a woman of quiet resilience, her hands shaking only slightly as she clutched a photograph of Harold in his younger years, clean-shaven, smiling, before oil-field life had weathered his face. She demanded answers from Sheriff Daley, pressing him with calm determination. "My brother didn't just walk off that rig and vanish. Something happened to him out there, Sheriff. And if you don't find out what, I will." Her arrival reignited tension with Grayson Oil executives. They feared lawsuits, bad publicity, and federal safety investigations. Behind closed doors, they pressured Daley to close the case quickly, labeling it an unsolvable workplace disappearance. But Daley, though pragmatic, felt the weight of something unnatural about the scene. He had buried enough men lost to accidents to know what evidence should look like. And Harold's case fit none of those patterns. By the end of March, the official investigation stalled. With no body, no evidence of foul play, and no credible leads, Harold Whitaker was quietly reclassified as missing, presumed dead. The oil rigs resumed full operation. The company discouraged further talk, subtly reminding workers that jobs were scarce and mouths to feed were many. Silence became the unwritten rule. Yet for those who had been on duty that night, the silence was unbearable. Ramirez quit within weeks, relocating to Houston. The younger crewmen stopped showing up for shifts, too rattled to work the night watch. Even Clyde Jennings, a hardened veteran of the rigs, took early retirement by summer's end. The rig where Harold vanished developed a reputation. Men whispered about the sound of static lingering near the control booth long after the CB was switched off, about tools misplaced and then found balanced precariously where no one had left them, about voices carried on the wind that seemed to call their names. Grayson eventually reassigned crews, leaving the rig dormant, an unspoken monument to the man who had walked into the machinery one night and never walked out. But Linda Whitaker refused to let the case die. She wrote letters to newspapers, lobbied state investigators, and compiled every scrap of rumor or clue into a binder she carried everywhere. She believed, no she knew, that her brother's story wasn't over. Harold hadn't just vanished into thin air. Something had taken him. And in the fall of 1979, nearly 18 months after the disappearance, Linda received a phone call that would confirm her worst fears. Another oil field worker, this time near Midland, had vanished during a night shift under eerily similar circumstances. The Whitaker case was not an isolated tragedy. It was the beginning of something larger, something that stretched across the West Texas oil fields like the pipelines themselves, an invisible network of fear, static, and vanishing men. The autumn wind carried dust and grit across the flatlands of Midland County, rattling against corrugated tin fences and filling the night with a dry, restless hum. It was September 2, 1979, when the second disappearance occurred. The victim this time was Eddie "Slim" Harrell, a wiry 28-year-old roughneck with a reputation for chasing trouble almost as much as chasing oil. Unlike Harold Whitaker, Eddie was no model worker. He drank, fought, and lived paycheck to paycheck, but he shared one crucial trait: he knew the rigs like the back of his hand. Men who worked the fields knew every sound, every shadow, every rhythm of the machinery. And that night, Eddie vanished in a way that made even the most hardened drillers whisper about curses. The Midland rig was smaller than the Grayson site where Harold had disappeared, but the conditions were nearly identical. Midnight shift, thin crew, routine maintenance. Eddie was last seen heading down into the auxiliary pit to reset a stubborn pressure valve. He carried a flashlight and whistled a Hank Williams tune as he descended. Less than 10 minutes later, his foreman radioed down, irritated that Eddie hadn't reported back. The reply was chillingly familiar. Not silence. Not garbled chatter. Static. Long, unbroken static that filled the CB like a scream too high for human ears. And buried within it, several crewmen swore they heard Eddie's voice. Words indistinct, dragged out, like someone speaking underwater. One man claimed he heard Eddie mutter, "Turn it off." Another insisted the phrase was "It's here." But when they replayed the tape from the CB recording unit, the voice was gone, leaving only the hiss of dead air. When the foreman descended into the pit, Eddie was nowhere to be found. His flashlight lay cracked on the grating, bulb still glowing weakly. His gloves were folded neatly on top of a tool chest. No footprints in the dust, no signs of struggle, no indication he had climbed out. Just absence. The pattern emerges word of Eddie's disappearance reached Sheriff Daley within hours. He had never stopped thinking about Harold Whitaker, though his deputies had long since relegated the case to dusty filing cabinets. When he heard the details, the empty rig, the static, the missing man, Daley felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't coincidence. He drove out to Midland himself, arriving before dawn. The scene was unervingly familiar, half-finished logbooks, equipment still humming, men gathered in tight, nervous circles. These weren't green kids spooking at shadows. They were men who had seen co-workers lose fingers, break ribs, and fall from platforms without flinching. But this was different. Daley inspected the pit, his flashlight beam skimming across steel and shale. He expected to find at least a trace, a drop of blood, a torn sleeve, something. Instead, he found what he remembered from Whitaker's case, a perfect absence, as if the man had been erased mid-motion. The company men were already spinning their story. A spokesman for Midland Petroleum insisted Eddie had likely walked off the job. "These men, they get tired of the grind," he told Daley with a thin smile. "Sometimes they just up and leave. Nothing mysterious about it." Daley wasn't convinced. "Men leave jobs, sure," he growled. "But they don't leave their boots, their gloves, and their damn paycheck behind." When he pressed for CB records, the company balked, claiming the static was interference. But Daley had already spoken to two workers who confirmed they'd heard something more, voices woven through the hiss. The sheriff drove back to Odessa that night, headlights cutting through empty desert roads. For the first time in his career, he admitted privately that he might be chasing something beyond explanation. Linda Whitaker's crusade for Linda Whitaker, Harold's sister, Eddie's disappearance was both vindication and fresh torment. She had spent the last year and a half writing letters to anyone who would listen, newspapers, state representatives, even Walter Cronkite. Most replies were polite rejections. A few never responded at all. Now, with a second missing worker, her warnings no longer seemed hysterical. "They're taking men," she told Sheriff Daley when he visited her small apartment in Dallas. Her binder of clippings and notes had grown thick, pages marked with red ink, maps of rigs dotted with pins. "This isn't random. It's not accidents. Something's happening out there in the oil fields, and they don't want us to know." Daley, weary but sympathetic, admitted she might be right. But without evidence, his hands were tied. "I can't fight the companies, Linda," he said softly. "They've got money, lawyers, hell, half the state depends on them. But I'll keep digging." Linda leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Sheriff, you don't understand. This isn't about money or lawyers. It's about something bigger. Harold didn't just vanish. He was taken. And now Eddie. Who's next?" Whispers in the community. By winter of 1979, the oil towns of Odessa, Midland, and Andrews buzzed with fear. Workers swapped stories over beers, voices dropping whenever strangers entered the bar. Some claimed to hear phantom static even when their radios were off. Others swore they had seen shadowy figures moving across the rigs at night, shapes that dissolved when approached. A preacher from a small Baptist church preached that the disappearances were punishment for man drilling into the devil's veins. Old-timers muttered about Comanche burial grounds disturbed by rigs. Younger men laughed nervously at ghost stories, but more and more of them refused night shifts. The companies responded with hush money and intimidation. Families of the missing were quietly paid settlements. Crews who spoke to reporters found themselves unemployed the next day. And yet, despite their efforts, the stories spread. Static, shadows, vanishing men. A chilling discovery in January 1980, nearly 2 years after Harold's disappearance. a hunter stumbled across something in the scrublands west of Odessa. Beneath a tangle of mesquite roots, he found a torn scrap of fabric, oil-stained flannel. Nearby, buried shallow in the dirt, lay a rusted wrench, initials HW scratched faintly into the handle. Sheriff Daley rushed to the site. Forensics confirmed the fabric matched the shirt Harold had worn that night. But there was no body, no bones, no other belongings. Just fragments, as though someone or something had left behind a reminder. Linda Whitaker received the items in a sealed evidence bag. She pressed the flannel to her face and wept. But even through her grief, she saw it for what it was, proof that Harold hadn't simply run away. He had been out there somewhere after that night. Which meant there might still be answers. The case grows darker over the next year. At least 3 more oil field workers across West Texas vanished under circumstances eerily similar to Harold and Eddie. Always night shifts. Always minimal witnesses. Always a lingering trace of static on the radios. By 1981, the press could no longer ignore it. The Dallas Morning News ran a feature titled "The Static Men, West Texas Workers Vanish Without a Trace." Reporters interviewed grieving families, defiant company spokesmen, and frightened workers. The article painted a chilling portrait, a string of disappearances the companies refused to acknowledge, stitched together by one impossible thread, men dissolving into nothing. Sheriff Daley, now graying and tired, found himself the reluctant face of the mystery. "I don't deal in ghost stories," he told reporters. "But I'll tell you this, something's happening out there in them fields, and I aim to find out what." But behind closed doors, he confessed to Linda Whitaker what he could never admit publicly. "Sometimes when I'm out there at night, I hear it too. That static. Comes out of nowhere. Makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like someone's whispering through the desert." The Texas oil fields had always been a place of danger. Fires, blowouts, falls, and gas leaks. But now, something new stalked the night. Something that left no blood, no bodies, no closure. And as 1982 dawned, whispers spread that the disappearances weren't random at all. That the static was calling specific men. That there was a pattern buried in the desert, waiting for someone to piece it together. And Sheriff Wayne Daley, haunted by the cases he couldn't close, would soon risk everything to uncover the truth. The year 1982 brought a boom to West Texas. Oil prices surged, rigs multiplied across the desert like iron forests, and towns such as Odessa and Midland swelled with workers chasing paychecks. Neon signs lit the highways, motels overflowed, and bars throbbed with country music and diesel laughter. Money was everywhere, and with it came silence. The companies wanted nothing more than to keep their drills spinning, their profits climbing, and their reputation clean. But beneath the glittering promise of prosperity, fear gnawed at the bones of the workers. Because by then, the oil fields weren't just producing crude. They were producing ghosts. A rising body count by spring of 1982, the tally had grown. 5 confirmed disappearances across rigs in Odessa, Midland, and Andrews. 2 suspected cases where families claimed men vanished during shifts, but companies insisted they had quit. Dozens of unconfirmed stories whispered in bunkhouses and roadside diners. The pattern was too precise to dismiss. Always the night shift. Always an empty workstation, tools left in place, meals half-eaten. Radios filled with static that sent shivers through men hardened by years of danger. Sheriff Wayne Daley, now 54 and weathered by sleepless nights, carried folders thicker than telephone books, each one labeled with a missing man's name. He wasn't a superstitious man. He'd spent decades burying wreck victims, bar fight casualties, and men broken by machinery, but even he could no longer pretend these cases were accidents. Something was stalking the rigs. His frustration grew with every Stonewall meeting with corporate lawyers. "Men run off all the time," they repeated like gospel. "Drifters, drinkers, gamblers. That's the oil patch for you. No conspiracy here, Sheriff." But Daley knew drifters left bodies. They left trails. They didn't evaporate into the desert night, leaving only the hiss of dead air. Linda Whitaker's obsession meanwhile, Linda Whitaker had transformed her grief into relentless pursuit. By 1982, her binder of clippings had grown into an entire filing cabinet. She mapped every disappearance, noting weather conditions, rig specifications, even moon phases. She interviewed widows, brothers, and co-workers, scribbling notes late into the night in her cramped Dallas apartment. Her obsession cost her dearly. Friends drifted away, colleagues at the school where she once taught avoided her in the hallways. Eventually, she resigned from teaching altogether, living on savings and part-time clerical jobs, dedicating her life to finding Harold, and now, finding justice for all the others. Daley and Linda formed an uneasy alliance. He had law, she had fire. She pressed him relentlessly, bringing fresh rumors and patterns she uncovered. They all vanished within 40 miles of Odessa, she said one night, slamming her finger on a map in his cluttered office. And always near rigs built after 1976. Look, doesn't that mean something? Daley rubbed his temples, exhausted. Means I'm drownin' in theories. I got no bodies, no suspects, no damn evidence that'll hold up in court. But Sheriff, Linda whispered, eyes fierce, you've got me. I'll never let them forget. The static phenomenon. By late 1982, more and more men reported strange radio interference long before anyone vanished. CB operators swore the static carried voices, sometimes whispers, sometimes moans, sometimes their own names. Crews began refusing to work nights without the radios turned off, a direct violation of safety rules. One particularly chilling incident was logged on October 14, 1982, at a rig east of Andrews. A supervisor named Bill Donahue filed a complaint after his men refused to continue drilling. They said they heard Whitaker's voice, he wrote. Clear as day, comin' through the static, sayin' it's cold down here. They damn near mutinied on me. I shut the rig down for the night. Lost half a day's production. Grayson Oil dismissed the report, calling Donahue unstable. He was quietly transferred to an administrative post in Dallas. But word spread. The static men, workers whispered, half joking, half terrified. Radios crackled with ghost voices. Some men swore they saw shadows where no shadows should be, moving against floodlights with unnatural rhythm. Corporate smokescreens. The oil companies doubled down on damage control. Families of the missing were pressured into signing confidential settlements. Reporters who asked too many questions found their access revoked. The companies donated generously to local churches, schools, and law enforcement budgets, ensuring loyalty and silence. But a handful of journalists refused to let go. In 1983, the Houston Chronicle published an exposé, The Disappearing Roughnecks of West Texas. It tied together 7 cases, quoted Linda Whitaker extensively, and hinted at company cover-ups. The backlash was immediate. Grayson Oil threatened lawsuits, advertisers pulled funding, and the Chronicle's editors buried follow-ups. But for one brief moment, the public caught a glimpse of the truth, that something was rotten in the desert. Sheriff Daley's breaking point. By 1984, Sheriff Daley was a haunted man. His once proud posture sagged, his hair turned fully gray, and his marriage dissolved under the weight of late nights and unspoken fears. Yet he refused to walk away. That year, he confided to Linda in a rare moment of vulnerability. They sat in his office, the hum of the window AC struggling against July heat. He poured 2 glasses of cheap bourbon and stared at his case files. I hear it sometimes, he admitted, voice low. That's static. Driving home late, CB off, radio off. Still hear it. Like it's inside my goddamn head. I think maybe it's calling me too. Linda reached across the desk, placing her hand on his. Then we don't stop, Sheriff. Not until we know. The Andrews incident. Everything changed in May 1985. At a rig near Andrews, not 1 but 2 workers vanished on the same night. Their names were Carl Dawson and Miguel Reyes, both in their 20s, both strong and experienced. Their crew testified that the men had been repairing a pump when the radios erupted in static. Within minutes, the pump stopped, tools clattered, and when the crew reached the platform, Dawson and Reyes were gone. Their gloves lay side by side on the railing. Their lunch pails still sat open, sandwiches half-eaten. The double disappearance rattled even the most skeptical. This was no drifter's escape, no staged accident. 2 men had been swallowed whole, leaving behind only static and silence. Escalation. By the end of the decade, whispers spread that over a dozen men had disappeared in the oil fields since Harold Whitaker in 1978. Official numbers were lower, companies and law enforcement only acknowledged a handful, but among workers, the truth was undeniable. Rigs developed reputations, haunted, cursed, the static rigs. Some were abandoned altogether, steel skeletons rusting in the desert sun, silent monuments to the vanished. Linda's crusade gained traction. By 1987, she had testified before a state commission investigating oilfield safety. But her words were drowned in corporate jargon and bureaucratic shrugs. Correlation is not causation, the commissioners repeated, eyes glazed. Still, Linda pressed on. She found allies among a small circle of journalists, paranormal investigators, and disillusioned workers. Together, they began compiling the first unofficial list of the missing. At the top of that list, in bold red ink, was her brother's name, Harold Whitaker. A whisper of revelation, the 1980s closed with more questions than answers. Sheriff Daley retired in 1989, shoulders bowed, reputation scarred by whispers of obsession. Linda continued her work alone, filling her apartment with maps, photos, and taped interviews. But in the fall of 1990, a strange piece of evidence surfaced, a cassette tape, mailed anonymously to Linda's apartment. The tape contained recordings from a CB operator who claimed he had intercepted transmissions on the night Dawson and Reyes vanished. Through the hiss of static, a voice emerged, fragmented, distorted, but unmistakably human. It said, "Don't let them dig deeper. Don't let them wake it." Linda replayed it until the tape warped, tears streaking her cheeks. For the first time, she realized, maybe the disappearances weren't just about men vanishing. Maybe the static wasn't just interference. Maybe something beneath the oil fields had been disturbed. And maybe Harold's fate was part of something far larger than she had ever imagined. The 1990s arrived like a second boom for Texas. Oil prices had slumped in the late 80s, but the Gulf War sent them spiking again. Odessa, Midland, and the smaller desert towns swelled with new life, motels filling with truckers, RV parks sprouting like weeds, and neon-lit bars pumping out George Strait ballads until dawn. To outsiders, West Texas was alive again. But to those who remembered, the oil fields were haunted. The land itself seemed restless, dotted with rusting derricks that no one would touch, their steel bones rattling in the wind. Static rigs, people still called them. They stood as warnings, silent memorials to men who had vanished. And then, in 1991, it happened again. The Midland Triple on the night of June 4, 1991, 3 men disappeared from a rig south of Midland. Their names were Luis Ortega, Daniel Price, and Victor Barnes. They were seasoned workers, part of a night crew tackling an unusually stubborn wellhead. At 2:17 a.m., their supervisor logged routine pressure readings. By 2:26 a.m., all 3 were gone. The details were grotesquely familiar. Ortega's hard hat found lying upright, headlamp still glowing. Price's thermos half-drunk, coffee still warm. Barnes' gloves folded neatly on a toolbox. Their tools were scattered as if set down mid-task. Their lunch pails sat untouched. But of the men themselves, there was no trace. The radio logs told the rest. At 2:21 a.m., the CB unit captured a surge of static so violent it nearly blew the speaker. Beneath it, barely audible, was a voice. The shift secretary swore it was Luis Ortega's. The words were slurred, almost mechanical, not again. Not again. By sunrise, the rig was abandoned. Supervisors called in the sheriff's office, who found the same story Daley had faced 13 years earlier. No bodies. No signs of flight or foul play. Just absence. This time, though, it was too big to bury. Media storm the Midland Triple, as it came to be known, exploded into national news. The Dallas Morning News, Houston Chronicle, and New York Times all ran front-page stories. 60 Minutes aired a segment titled "Vanished in the Oil Fields." Families spoke on camera, clutching photographs of their sons and husbands. Journalists hounded Grayson Oil executives, demanding answers. But as the cameras rolled, the companies doubled down. "We operate some of the safest rigs in the country," one spokesman declared. "Any suggestion of foul play or supernatural causes is reckless speculation." Supernatural. It was the first time a company man had said the word out loud, even if only to mock it. But the ridicule backfired. Workers began refusing to take night shifts. Some rigs went half-manned, others shut down completely. By autumn, whispers spread that Grayson Oil and Midland Petroleum were covering up something far darker than accidents. Linda Whitaker's crusade goes national for Linda Whitaker. The 1990s were vindication. She had spent over a decade sounding alarms no one wanted to hear. Now, at last, The world was listening. She appeared on Larry King Live in September 1991, clutching Harold's photograph. Her voice trembled, but her words cut through. My brother disappeared in 1978. I was told it was an accident. Since then, more than a dozen men have vanished in the exact same way. Their gloves, their helmets, their lunches left behind, but no bodies. Something is happening in those fields. And until we admit it, more men will vanish. Linda's crusade divided America. Skeptics called her a grief-stricken sister chasing ghosts. Believers flooded her with letters, phone calls, and tips about other strange disappearances across the country. She began collecting these stories, convinced Harold's fate was part of something larger. She wasn't alone. Paranormal investigators, conspiracy theorists, and amateur sleuths rallied behind her. One group, calling themselves the Static Watch, published a newsletter cataloging every disappearance linked to oil rigs. Their motto was simple: the static is real. Sheriff Daley's decline. By the time the Midland Triple occurred, Sheriff Wayne Daley was long retired. He lived quietly in a small house outside Odessa, his health failing and his spirit broken by decades of unanswered questions. But when Linda knocked on his door in 1992, he let her in. His living room smelled of old bourbon and dust. Stacks of yellowed case files littered the table. His once steady hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "They're never gonna find him," he rasped. "Not Harold. Not Eddie. Not them three boys. They ain't here no more." "What do you mean, Wayne?" Linda pressed. He exhaled smoke, staring into the dark. "Whatever's in them fields, it takes em. Pulls em right out of this world. I heard it myself, back in '83. Static on the CB, middle of the desert. Voice whisperin' my name. I shoulda gone then. Maybe I woulda if I hadn't been too damn scared." Linda's stomach turned. She had come for answers, but what she saw in Daley's eyes wasn't resolution, it was surrender. He died 2 years later, taking his secrets with him. The static tape in 1994, Linda received another cassette tape in the mail. No return address. Inside was a 30-minute CB recording from a rig near Andrews. At first, it was just noise, harsh static bursts of distortion. But 15 minutes in, a voice broke through. Male, deep, unmistakable, Linda. She dropped the tape player, hands trembling. When she gathered the courage to replay it, the voice spoke again. "Don't dig deeper." The tape ended abruptly with a piercing screech that left her ears ringing. Linda called the sheriff's office. They dismissed it as a prank. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the voice wasn't Harold's, or any of the missing men she knew. It sounded older. Ancient. Corporate secrets. The 1990s brought new players into the mix: federal regulators, investigative journalists, and even university researchers. Some dismissed the disappearances as industrial accidents. Others suspected corporate sabotage, unions planting fear to negotiate better pay. But a leaked memo from Grayson Oil told a different story. Dated November 1979, it warned executives of unexplained worker incidents linked to rigs built after a specific drilling expansion. The memo suggested halting construction in sensitive areas. It was buried, of course, but when reporters obtained it in 1996, public outrage exploded. Grayson doubled down on denial. The memo was preliminary speculation, they claimed. "We have no evidence of anything unusual in our operations." But for Linda, the document was proof. Proof that the companies had known all along. The Odessa incident, the 1990s, ended with one of the most terrifying events yet. On August 14, 1999, at a rig just outside Odessa, 4 men vanished in a single night. Witnesses described a blinding flash of light at 3:12 a.m., followed by an ear-splitting burst of static on every radio within 10 miles. When the light faded, the men were gone. This time, dozens of people heard it. Truckers on the highway. Farmers in their fields. Even a late-night DJ in Odessa claimed his station equipment went dead for 3 minutes, replaced by a sound like whispering voices underwater. The story spread across national news, the internet amplifying rumors into hysteria. Was it aliens? A government experiment? A curse? Theories multiplied faster than answers. But Linda knew one thing for certain: the disappearances were escalating. And whatever had taken Harold was not finished. Closing the century by the dawn of the new millennium, the list of missing oilfield workers stretched into the dozens. Some families accepted settlements. Others filed lawsuits. None found closure. And Linda Whitaker, now gray-haired and weary but still relentless, kept pushing. She told anyone who would listen, "They're not gone. They're trapped. The static isn't just noise, it's a doorway." Her words were dismissed by many. But those who had worked the rigs at night, those who had heard the hiss and the whispers, nodded silently. Because deep down, they feared she was right. The new millennium brought new tools: cell phones, digital recorders, satellite imaging. Technology promised clarity in places where mystery had lingered for decades. But in the oil fields of West Texas, the static only grew louder. By the early 2000s, the disappearances had slowed, at least officially. Fewer cases made the papers, fewer names appeared in sheriff's reports. Companies insisted the problem had faded, that the rash of missing men belonged to the past. But workers whispered a different story. Rigs still hummed with unease. Men still refused certain shifts. Radios still hissed with voices no one wanted to hear. And Linda Whitaker, now in her late 50s, wasn't done fighting. Digital static, the first major break of the new decade, came in 2003, when a worker at a rig near Andrews smuggled out a mini-disc recording from the control booth. His name was Timothy T.J. Moore, a 24-year-old night tech with a taste for conspiracy forums. He claimed he had left the CB running one evening, microphone open, recording to a digital disc. The audio was 72 minutes of ordinary chatter, equipment checks, tired voices, occasional laughter. But then, at exactly 2:19 a.m., the static began. It wasn't random hiss, it pulsed in rhythm, almost like breathing. Beneath it came a layered chorus of voices, male, female, overlapping. Words spilled in fragments: cold, deeper, don't watch the shadows, not safe. At the 2:27 mark, one voice emerged above the rest. Clear. Sharp. A man's voice saying, "Harold." TJ panicked and shut off the recorder. The next day, he quit. Within weeks, he posted the audio file online under the title "Voices in the Oilfield Static." It spread across early forums like above Top Secret and coast-to-coast AM message boards. Skeptics called it doctored. Believers swore it was proof that the missing men were reaching out. When Linda heard it, she sat alone in her kitchen, headphones pressed to her ears. At the moment the voice said "Harold," she froze. It wasn't her brother's voice, but it knew his name. A new ally that same year, Linda connected with Detective Marcus Alvarez, a young investigator newly assigned to the Midland County Sheriff's Office. Alvarez was skeptical of ghost stories, but he was also meticulous. He had read the old Whitaker and Harrell files, seen the photographs of lunch pails left untouched, heard the panic in radio transcripts. "Something's wrong here," he admitted to Linda when they first met at a diner off Highway 20. "I don't buy curses, but I don't buy corporate spin either. Men don't just vanish like that." Alvarez began reviewing evidence with fresh eyes. He requested access to old CB recordings, company maintenance logs, even weather reports from the nights of each disappearance. What struck him wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. Every time static appeared, it coincided with sudden drops in barometric pressure. Tiny weather anomalies. Almost like the atmosphere itself had bent. "It's not random," Alvarez told Linda. "It's environmental. Something triggers it. Maybe electromagnetic. Maybe geological. But it happens on schedule." Linda leaned across the table, eyes blazing. "You're saying the static is a pattern. Which means it can be predicted." The 2006 Odessa collapse on August 19, 2006, a crew near Odessa experienced what would later be called the Odessa collapse. At 1:43 a.m., floodlights around the rig began flickering. Radios erupted in static. Workers described the air as electric, their hair standing on end. Then came a sound no one could explain, a deep, thrumming note, like the earth itself groaning. 2 men disappeared, Jacob Flores and Henry Wallace. But this time, something else happened. The rig's digital surveillance system, newly installed that year, captured it. The grainy black and white footage showed both men working on a pump. The static begins, visible as interference lines across the video. Flores turns, mouth open, as if shouting. Wallace drops his wrench. Then in less than 2 seconds, both men blur, streaks of light, distortions, and vanish. Their tools clatter to the floor. The footage leaked months later, a 16-second clip posted anonymously online. Most dismissed it as CGI. But those who had worked the rigs swore it was real. And for the first time, Linda had something tangible. This, she told Alvarez, slamming a laptop shut after showing him the clip, is proof. They can't deny it anymore. Corporate retaliation, but denial wasn't the company's strategy anymore. It was intimidation. In late 2006, Linda's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except her filing cabinets. Decades of clippings, letters, and maps gone. She filed a police report, but nothing came of it. Alvarez suspected corporate security, but proving it was impossible. Careful, he warned her. These aren't just oilmen. They've got lawyers, private contractors, money. If they think you're threatening them, they'll bury you. Linda's answer was simple. They already buried my brother. Patterns in the desert. Over the next few years, Alvarez and Linda worked quietly, building their own case. They discovered that every disappearance occurred within 5 miles of a geological fault line running beneath the Permian Basin. Old maps from the 1940s marked the fault as unstable, prone to gas seepage. But modern drilling had ignored it, punching rigs directly above the cracks. Alvarez hypothesized that seismic activity might explain the anomalies, pressure shifts releasing gas pockets, causing hallucinations, radio interference, even disorientation leading to accidents. But Linda refused to believe her brother and dozens of others had simply wandered off choking on fumes. Hallucinations don't fold gloves. They don't leave coffee warm. They don't erase men on camera. Alvarez couldn't argue. The 2009 Andrews recording in 2009, a final chilling piece of evidence surfaced. A trucker named Earl Simmons was hauling equipment past a rig outside Andrews when his CB radio crackled alive. He recorded the audio on his dashcam mic. The file begins with heavy static, then, a man's voice screaming, "Not again." A second voice whispering, "Harold." Then, chillingly, a child's voice giggling. Moments later, Earl's dashcam captured bright light on the horizon, though no lightning storms were reported that night. When Linda heard the child's voice, she felt her chest tighten. Harold had no children. Neither did most of the missing. But the laugh was unmistakable. Human. Innocent. It suggested something else. Something worse. Closing the decade by 2010, Linda was nearly 70. Her hair silver, her health failing, but her fire undimmed. "They're not gone," she insisted to Alvarez as they drove the desert backroads one evening, headlights sweeping endless scrub. "They're somewhere. The static isn't noise, it's a door." Alvarez, young enough to be her son, didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe in logic, in evidence. But the tape, the footage, the disappearances, they told a story no logic could hold. That night, as they drove past an abandoned rig, their CB hissed to life. Static filled the car. And through it came a single word, soft as breath, "Linda." Both froze. Alvarez swerved slightly, knuckles white on the wheel. The static faded as quickly as it came. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Because both of them knew, whatever haunted the oil fields wasn't finished. The second decade of the 21st century brought the world into sharper focus. High-speed internet, smartphones, and digital archives meant that nothing stayed buried forever, except, it seemed, the men who had vanished in the oil fields of West Texas. By the early 2010s, Linda Whitaker was 70 years old. Her body had slowed, arthritis stiffening her fingers, lungs weakened from decades of stress and desert dust. But her mind remained razor-sharp. Her apartment walls in Dallas were plastered with maps, photographs, and pin strings connecting places and names like a detective's war room. To visitors, it looked obsessive, even deranged. But to Linda, it was truth written in red ink. And to Detective Marcus Alvarez, it was a lifeline. Alvarez takes the lead. By 2012, Alvarez had become lead investigator for Midland County's cold cases. His colleagues whispered that he was wasting his career chasing ghost rigs, but Alvarez didn't care. He'd seen the evidence, the Odessa surveillance tape, the static recordings, the CB whispers that seemed to breathe names. He couldn't walk away. He spent nights combing through digital archives, hunting for overlooked details. Old rig logs, weather reports, seismic data. Again and again, the same pattern emerged: sudden drops in barometric pressure, minor tremors, unexplained electrical surges. One night, exhausted and half-blind from staring at spreadsheets, Alvarez whispered to himself, "It's like the ground is opening." Linda's last campaign. Despite her failing health, Linda kept pushing. In 2013, she launched a small website called The Static Files. It was crude by modern standards, filled with scanned documents, case summaries, and her own commentary. But it drew attention. Families of other missing workers reached out, sharing their stories. A man in Oklahoma claimed his uncle vanished from a drilling site in 1985. A woman in Louisiana said her father disappeared during offshore maintenance in 1994. The disappearances weren't just Texas. The static stretched farther. Linda's website was dismissed by mainstream media, labeled conspiracy fodder. But among those who had heard the hiss themselves, it became a beacon. Alvarez quietly monitored the posts, cross-referencing with his own data. He didn't tell Linda, but he believed she was right. The oil field vanishings weren't isolated. They were nodes in a larger pattern. The 2015 Odessa surge. The next major event struck on September 9, 2015. At a dormant rig outside Odessa, abandoned since the late 90s, teenagers dared each other to spend the night. 4 boys, aged 16 to 18, carried beer, flashlights, and a smartphone to film their antics. The video later recovered from one boy's phone showed them laughing, climbing rusted beams, joking about the static men. At 1:12 a.m., the laughter faltered. The camera caught floodlights flickering, though no power had run to the rig for years. A deep hum filled the air. Static crackled, loud enough to drown their voices. The boys panicked. The video shook wildly as they bolted. Then, in one frame, less than a second, 2 shadowy figures appeared behind them. Tall, distorted, blurred. The camera dropped. The final 10 seconds were nothing but static and screaming. By dawn, all 4 boys were missing. Their phones, wallets, and shoes were found scattered near the rig. The only trace was the corrupted video. News outlets swarmed Odessa. Parents wept on camera. The clip spread across YouTube, fueling hysteria. Skeptics cried hoax, claiming the boys faked it. But their families never saw them again. Linda called Alvarez the night she saw the footage. Her voice was thin, trembling. "Marcus," she whispered. "It's not just men anymore. It's the young. It's widening." Linda's final days. In 2016, Linda's health declined sharply. She was hospitalized twice for pneumonia, her once fiery voice reduced to a rasp. Alvarez visited her often, bringing updates, playing recordings, showing her maps. She would grip his hand, her eyes still burning with determination. "Promise me," she said one night, her breathing labored. "Promise me you'll find Harold. Don't let them bury him in paperwork and lies." Alvarez nodded. "I promise." She passed away on March 3, 2017, at the age of 74. At her funeral, held in a small Dallas church, Alvarez delivered the eulogy. He spoke not of conspiracy, not of static, but of a sister who refused to stop searching when the world told her to give up. After the service, he stood alone at her grave and whispered, "I'll keep looking, Linda. I'll keep listening." Alvarez's obsession with Linda gone, Alvarez threw himself deeper into the mystery. He began assembling a comprehensive timeline from 1978 to 2017, cataloging every disappearance, every static surge, every piece of evidence. His office walls became a mosaic of photographs, maps, and charts, eerily similar to Linda's apartment. He noticed something chilling: the disappearances followed cycles. Clusters every 7 to 9 years, always during late summer or early fall, always near rigs positioned along the same geological fault line. And then he found something else. In archived state records, buried in an environmental study from 1977, was a warning: geological instability detected in Permian Basin fault zones. High risk of subsurface resonance phenomena. Further drilling not recommended. The study was stamped restricted and never released publicly. Alvarez sat back, pulse racing. Subsurface resonance. Could that be what triggered the static? Was drilling disturbing something beneath the earth that should never have been touched? The 2018 Midland Echo. In September 2018, Alvarez joined a team of geologists conducting surveys near Midland. They deployed ground-penetrating radar and acoustic sensors. At 2:43 a.m., 1. Sensor recorded an anomaly, a low-frequency echo beneath the Earth, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The geologists dismissed it as equipment malfunction. Alvarez wasn't convinced. He smuggled out the audio file. Listening to it late at night, he felt his blood run cold. Beneath the thrum was faint static. And beneath the static, voices. One word emerged clearly. Alvarez. He slammed the laptop shut, chest heaving. It knew his name. Closing the decade by the end of the 2010s, the disappearances had reached urban legend status. Paranormal podcasts dissected them, internet forums buzzed with theories, and YouTube channels analyzed grainy footage frame by frame. The static men became myth. But for Alvarez, it wasn't myth. It was unfinished business. Linda was gone, but her fire lived in him. And now, for the first time, he believed he was close to understanding. Because the static wasn't random. It wasn't just noise. It was calling names. And one of those names was his. The 2020s dawned with uncertainty. The oil industry was changing, battered by fluctuating prices and rising environmental pressures. Some rigs shut down, others modernized with digital monitoring and AI-driven systems. The desert landscape of West Texas became a patchwork of abandoned skeletons and gleaming new facilities, old ghosts side by side with modern machines. But for Detective Marcus Alvarez, now in his late 40s, one thing hadn't changed: the static. The pandemic silence in 2020, when the world slowed under lockdown, so did the rigs. Crews were cut, shifts minimized, and night work dropped to bare bones. For a brief window, the disappearances seemed to stop. Alvarez allowed himself to hope, maybe the cycle had finally broken. But quiet only made the return louder. In October 2021, as rigs ramped back to full operation, a man named Randy Choate, 39, vanished during an overnight maintenance check near Andrews. His co-workers reported the now familiar signs: radios bursting into static, floodlights flickering, tools abandoned mid-task. And once again, there was a recording. The rig's new digital monitoring system captured more than audio, it logged electromagnetic surges. At 2:11 a.m., the system spiked wildly, measuring energy levels far beyond expected output. The surge lasted 34 seconds. When it ended, Randy was gone. Alvarez obtained the file through a contact at the state regulator's office. He played it alone in his darkened office. The audio began with hiss, then a sharp crack, then voices layered like echoes in a cavern. One word froze him: Linda. It had been 4 years since she died. Yet the static still spoke her name. Alvarez crosses the line by 2022. Alvarez's obsession was consuming him. He no longer handled other cases. His colleagues whispered that he'd become another Daley, the sheriff who had ruined his life chasing shadows. But Alvarez didn't care. He began trespassing on abandoned rigs, carrying a handheld spectrum analyzer and a body cam. He recorded hours of footage: wind howling, static bursting in bursts, shadows dancing at the edges of floodlight beams. In one video, taken on a rig outside Odessa, his spectrum analyzer spiked violently. His body cam showed dust swirling into a spiral, forming a vague human outline before collapsing. The recording lasted 12 seconds. When Alvarez showed it to his captain, the man slammed the laptop shut. "You bring me ghosts, Marcus? I need suspects. Evidence. Bodies. Not campfire stories." But Alvarez couldn't stop. A warning from the past that winter, Alvarez dug deeper into old archives, desperate for connections. He uncovered a forgotten Grayson oil report from 1976, a year before Harold Whitaker vanished. The report described unusual seismic resonance detected during test drills near Odessa. Engineers noted strange readings on analog monitors, patterns resembling human voice frequencies. They recommended halting further expansion. The recommendation was ignored. Scrawled in pencil on the margin of one page was a chilling note: "Don't wake it." Alvarez stared at the words until his eyes burned. Someone had known. Long before Harold. Long before Linda's crusade. Someone inside the company had seen the warning and buried it. The 2023 Odessa event, the cycle erupted again in August 2023. This time, the incident was captured in brutal clarity by modern smartphones and live streams. A group of contractors repairing an old rig streamed a Facebook Live video around 1:40 a.m. The footage showed them laughing, cursing, drinking beers as they worked. Then mid-sentence, the audio turned to static. The camera jolted as one worker screamed. Floodlights blinked out. When they returned seconds later, 2 men were gone. The live stream continued for another 20 minutes, comments flooding in real time. Thousands of viewers watched the chaos. Workers yelling, radios hissing, someone whispering, "Not again, not again." By morning, the video was deleted. But not before hundreds had downloaded copies. Within days, TikTok clips, Twitter threads, and YouTube analyses dissected every frame. The Odessa event went viral, sparking a wave of theories: aliens, government experiments, curses. For Alvarez, it was confirmation. The disappearances had always been hidden, buried under corporate spin and local silence. Now, the world had seen. The FBI steps in the Odessa event forced the federal government's hand. The FBI dispatched a task force to West Texas in September 2023. Officially, they investigated workplace safety violations and cyber hoaxes. Unofficially, they wanted to know why dozens of men had vanished without trace for 45 years. Alvarez met with them twice. He presented his evidence: the cycles, the tapes, the seismic data, the 1976 memo. The agents listened, took notes, and left. Weeks later, he received a call from a contact inside the bureau. "They're shutting it down, Marcus," the voice warned. "Not investigating, burying. Too many ties to federal contracts. Too many skeletons." Alvarez felt the same despair Daley must have felt decades earlier. The truth was slipping away again. The return to Harold's rig on November 14, 2023, Alvarez made a decision. He returned to the place where it all began, the abandoned Grayson oil rig outside Odessa, where Harold Whitaker had vanished in 1978. The rig was a skeleton, rusted beams groaning in the wind. Sand had half buried the machinery. But as Alvarez stepped onto the platform, his CB crackled to life. Static hissed, then a whisper, "Behind you." He spun, flashlight beam cutting the dark. Nothing. But the analyzer in his pocket pulsed violently. He climbed to the maintenance platform where Harold's hard hat had been found. He whispered into the night, "Harold. Linda. Can you hear me?" The static roared. For a heartbeat, he swore he heard multiple voices, screaming, crying, calling his name. He staggered back, knees weak. The sound vanished, leaving only the desert wind. He fled the rig that night, shaken to his core. But deep down he knew, he was closer than ever. The final pattern in early 2024, Alvarez compiled his lifetime of research into a single report. He mapped every disappearance, every static surge, every anomaly. The result was terrifying. The events weren't random. They formed a line across the Permian Basin, rigs aligned like teeth along a fault. At the center of the line was Harold's rig. The static wasn't chaos, it was structure. A signal. A doorway. And the cycle wasn't finished. Based on the pattern, the next surge was due in summer 2025. Closing the chapter by late 2024, Alvarez had become a pariah in law enforcement, dismissed as unstable, obsessed, broken. But in private, he prepared. He bought recording equipment, drone cameras, spectrum analyzers. He marked the date on his calendar. July 2025. The cycle would open again. And Alvarez would be waiting. The summer of 2025 arrived like a furnace across West Texas. Heat shimmered on the asphalt highways, and dust storms rolled through the Permian Basin, blotting out the horizon in ochre haze. For most people in Odessa, Midland, and Andrews, it was business as usual: rigs pumping, trucks hauling, bars crowded with workers drinking off long shifts. But for Detective Marcus Alvarez, it was the countdown. He had been waiting for this year, this season, this cycle. Decades of disappearances had led him here. Harold Whitaker in 1978. Eddie Harrell in 1979. The Midland Triple in 1991. The Odessa event in 2023. All of it pointed to the summer of 2025. And Alvarez was ready to face it. The watch on July 8, 2025, Alvarez parked his unmarked SUV 2 miles from the abandoned Grayson rig, the same site where Harold Whitaker had vanished nearly 50 years earlier. He carried a duffel bag filled with equipment, 2 handheld spectrum analyzers calibrated to detect electromagnetic surges, 4 motion-activated cameras with night vision, a body cam strapped to his chest, a CB radio, tuned to the frequency Harold's crew had used that night in 1978, and an old cassette recorder Linda had once given him, its plastic yellowed but still functional. The desert was silent except for the drone of cicadas. Alvarez set up camp on a ridge overlooking the skeletal rig. He mounted cameras on metal stakes, wired the CB into his vehicle's battery, and waited. By midnight, the air felt strange, dense, charged, as if a storm was building without clouds. The spectrum analyzers ticked higher, their screens glowing red. Alvarez steadied his breathing. "It's starting," he muttered into his recorder. The surge at 12:41 a.m., the first surge hit. Floodlights he had set up flickered violently, though the power source was steady. His CB erupted in static so sharp it made him wince. Through the hiss, a voice emerged, faint but clear. "Harold." Alvarez's chest tightened. He grabbed the mic. "Harold, can you hear me?" The reply came not as words, but as overlapping whispers, dozens of voices speaking at once, some sobbing, some screaming, some calling his name. "Marcus. Marcus, don't dig, not again." The spectrum analyzer spiked off the chart. His cameras blinked, struggling to hold focus. And then, in the corner of his vision, he saw them. Shadows. Human-shaped, tall, elongated, flickering like heat mirages. They moved along the rig beams with unnatural rhythm, appearing and vanishing between frames. For the first time in his career, Alvarez felt true terror. The vanishing light at 12:48 a.m., one of his motion cameras captured something impossible. The feed showed the rig platform, empty. Then, in less than a second, a flare of white light burst across the frame. When it cleared, a figure appeared, blurry, distorted, but undeniably human. The man staggered, reaching out. His mouth opened as if to scream. Then, before the frame could stabilize, the figure dissolved into static and vanished. Alvarez replayed the footage on his monitor, his hands trembling. He froze the frame where the figure's face was visible, grainy, unclear, but familiar. It looked like Harold Whitaker. The descent against every instinct, Alvarez approached the rig. His boots crunched on gravel as he crossed the barren lot, flashlight beams slicing through the skeletal beams. "Harold," he shouted. "If you're here, show me." The CB hissed. The whisper came again, "Behind you." Alvarez spun, but there was nothing. Only the rig, the desert, the endless black sky. Then the ground shuddered. A low hum rose beneath his feet, deeper than machinery, deeper than weather. The steel beams groaned like a living thing. His analyzer went haywire, the numbers scrolling so fast they blurred. And the voices grew louder. Hundreds of them, overlapping in a deafening chorus. Names, prayers, cries. He clutched his head, falling to his knees. "Stop," he screamed. "What do you want?" The answer came in a single unified voice, clear through the roar, "Don't let them dig deeper." The collapse at 12:59 a.m., the surge peaked. Floodlights exploded in bursts of sparks. The rig's skeletal frame vibrated violently, as if resonating with something beneath the earth. Alvarez's cameras cut to static. His recorder screeched. And then, silence. When the dust settled, Alvarez stood alone on the rig platform, his ears ringing. The analyzers were dead, their batteries drained. His cameras had melted circuits. The CB was fried. But the rig itself, untouched. Not collapsed, not broken. Just silent. And Harold Whitaker, if it had been him, was gone again. The aftermath. Alvarez drove back to Odessa at dawn, his hands shaking on the wheel. He had captured fragments, the distorted face, the overlapping voices, the electromagnetic surges, but no proof strong enough to withstand scrutiny. He knew how the story would play out. If he brought the evidence to his department, they'd laugh. If he sent it to the press, they'd call it doctored. If he confronted the oil companies, they'd bury it. But Alvarez also knew something else. The cycle wasn't over. It had grown louder, stronger, more violent. And if the voices were right, if drilling deeper was awakening something, then the real danger was only beginning. He poured the last of Linda's ashes, which he had kept in a small locket, onto the desert ground near Harold's rig. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I tried, Linda. I'm still trying." Then he drove into the rising sun, unsure if he was chasing answers, or if the answers were already chasing him. A closing whisper that night, as Alvarez reviewed the corrupted footage, one final frame appeared, one he didn't remember capturing. It showed the rig platform, empty. Across the bottom of the screen, scrawled in jagged static, were 4 words, "We are not gone." Alvarez froze. The hairs on his arms rose. And somewhere, faint in the silence, he thought he heard a child's laughter. The desert was black and endless on August 2, 2025, when Detective Marcus Alvarez returned to Harold Whitaker's rig for the last time. The summer heat pressed down like a weight, cicadas screaming in the mesquite. The rusted skeleton of the rig loomed ahead, silent against the star-pocked sky. Alvarez carried no backup, no sanction from his department. He carried only his recorder, his spectrum analyzer, and the promise he had made to Linda Whitaker before she died. Find Harold. Don't let them bury him in lies. The threshold at 12:03 a.m., the first surge hit. His analyzer spiked, lights flickering across its display. The CB on the passenger seat hissed, then crackled into a voice. "Marcus." He tightened his grip on the mic, "I'm here." The reply came layered, dozens of voices speaking as one, "We are waiting." Alvarez felt the air shift. The desert grew unnaturally still, as though every insect and coyote had fallen silent. The rig groaned, its beams vibrating with a low-frequency hum that rattled his bones. He stepped onto the platform. His boots echoed against steel. The air smelled of ozone, sharp and electric. And then, shadows. Figures flickered along the beams, tall, elongated, human-shaped but wrong, their movements jerky, as if filmed on broken frames. They stood just at the edge of vision, vanishing when he turned toward them. "Harold!" Alvarez shouted, his voice cracking. "If you're here, show me." The opening at 12:19 a.m., the ground beneath the rig shuddered. His analyzer screamed, numbers scrolling faster than he could read. The CB burst into static so violent it drowned his own thoughts. Then came the light. A column of pale white erupted from the pit where the drill had once bored into the earth. It wasn't fire, it wasn't electricity, it was something else, a shimmer like liquid glass. Shadows twisted inside it, writhing, reaching upward. Through the light came voices. Screams. Cries. Whispers overlapping in a deafening chorus. He could make out names: Harold, Eddie, Luis, Victor, Jacob, the vanished men of 4 decades. Their voices stretched thin, distorted, as though dragged through miles of static. And then he heard it. Linda's voice. "Marcus. Don't let them dig deeper." His chest clenched. He staggered forward, fighting the pull of the light. The rig trembled around him, bolts rattling loose, rust raining like dust. "Linda," he cried. "What is it? What's down there?" The reply came in a single unified roar, "It's awake." The revelation, the light flared, blinding. For a moment, Alvarez swore he saw them. Faces of the missing men, pale and distorted, mouths open in silent screams. Harold among them, his eyes hollow, his hand reaching out. He lifted his own hand, desperate to bridge the gap. Their fingers almost touched, then the light convulsed, pulling Harold backward into the swirl. His face dissolved into static, his scream lost in the roar. The rig shook violently. Beams bent. Gravel split beneath Alvarez's feet. He dropped to his knees, clutching the recorder. "This is Alvarez," he gasped into the mic, his voice ragged. "The vanishings, they're not abductions, not accidents. Something beneath us. Resonance. A breach. The static isn't noise, it's a doorway. They're not gone. They're trapped." The voices surged louder. A child's laugh rang out, the same eerie giggle heard in recordings years earlier. The light pulsed once, twice, then collapsed inward with a deafening crack. Darkness swallowed the rig. The silence when Alvarez opened his eyes. Dawn was breaking over the desert. The rig stood silent, scorched at its base as though lightning had struck. His analyzer was fried, its screen blackened. The CB lay shattered. His cameras were melted husks. But his recorder, still clutched in his fist, had survived. The red light blinked. He pressed play. Static filled the air. Then, faint but clear, came a single phrase. "We are not gone." Aftermath. Alvarez staggered back into Odessa that morning, clothes torn, eyes wild. His captain dismissed his story, called him delusional, placed him on leave. But within weeks, rumors spread. Locals claimed to hear static echoing across the desert at night. Truckers swore they saw pale figures standing along the highway, vanishing when headlights struck them. And then, in September 2025, another man disappeared from a rig near Midland. His gloves were found folded on a railing. His thermos still warm. His radio filled with static. The cycle had not ended. The legacy Marcus Alvarez never returned to duty. He left Odessa quietly, vanishing into the vast highways of Texas. Some say he lives in a cabin outside El Paso, filling notebooks with charts and maps, waiting for the next surge. Others claim he disappeared himself, taken by the static he pursued. But his final recording survives. Copied, uploaded, shared across forums and podcasts, dissected frame by frame. The whisper repeats again and again, "We are not gone." And in the endless silence of the West Texas desert, the rigs still stand. Steel skeletons against the horizon, waiting for night. Waiting for static.